Hey everybody, welcome back. We are just days away from the War Within release, and time of recording this, one day away from the initial patch leading up to War Within. With that comes some big changes to Retribution Paladin, as well as preps us for our hero talents, Templar and Herald of the Sun. While we did get some big changes, the rotation, our abilities, that kind of stuff are generally about the same. So this isn't going to be a full how-to Retribution Paladin like the previous video, which I'll share here. This one will be more about the changes to build off of that foundation we've already set to carry on into the new expansion. Recently, I've been spending most of my time streaming rather than making videos, uh, pushing a lot of keys and getting ready for raid. We will be raiding Mythic as soon as it goes live, and excited to get started with that. But I will, as as we get more hands-on with the hero talents, we'll see if it's worth kind of going into a deeper dive into those as well. But we will touch on those in this video to give it, just a overview of what to expect once you hit level 80. If you have any questions, definitely leave a comment down below. Feel free to stop by when I'm streaming. And yeah, let's get going. Okay, so right out of the gate, we only have two new talents. We've got a lot of changed ones, but only two new ones. That's Burn to Ash and Radiant Glory. Burn to Ash is a nice buff to the Truth's Wake effect that is applied by our Wake of Ashes. Now, Radiant Glory is really the interesting talent where it turns Crusade or Avenging Wrath, whichever you spec into a more passive ability that procs off of Wake of Ashes. So that does make it a 30-second cooldown instead of a 1 minute or 2 minute for Crusade cooldown. You do also get a chance to randomly proc Radiant Glory with every holy power that you spend. We do also see a few talents removed. Truth's Wake, that gets folded into Wake of Ashes baseline. So one less point that we have to spend there. Auras of Swift Vengeance. This is a big point of contention. We do lose our Retribution aura, so that talent is replaced with just Crusader aura. And then lastly, an unfortunate change that they've been making to a lot of melee classes that had additional melee range. We no longer have that. We still get our range from Judgment, all of our abilities that have further range, but our melee auto attack range is no longer increased by that additional 3 yards. So, like I was saying before, on the other hand, we do have a lot of redesigned talents. I'm just going to quickly go over kind of a list of them, and then in my testing notes, we'll go over ones that are a little more relevant, that will actually impact us. So you'll notice a lot of the specific ability procs have now become just a holy power proc. So, like with Righteous Cause, Templar's Verdict, Final Verdict, and Justicar's Vengeance have a 20% chance to reset the cooldown of Blade of Justice. Now has become a smaller chance to proc, but it's for every holy power that is spent. Or on the other hand, there are some talents that are getting an additional ability, or that are getting an additional trait, like Art of War, which now increases the proc chance to reset Blade of Justice based on our crits. So unfortunately, Final Reckoning is getting a little bit of a nerf, where it used to buff all of our holy power abilities by 30%. Now it buffs our single target abilities by 30%, so your Final Verdict. And then it buffs our others by 15%, so it has less effect on our AoE, which is where you would normally use Final Reckoning. does play with the balance of Final Reckoning and Execution Sense a little bit, which is still going to be interesting to see how that plays out into the next expansion. No longer do we have Vengeful Wrath that gives us a guaranteed crit on Hammer of Wrath. Instead, Hammer of Wrath just does 50% increased damage to enemies below 35% health. Does increase the value of our crit rating because we don't have that guarantee, but we'll see how much that actually impacts it. A very big change for us as far as influencing our stat balances is the change that's made to our mastery, and that involves this talent, High Lord's Judgment. Beforehand, High Lord's Judgment just increased the duration of our judgment damage buff, but then it also applied like a second stack of it, but it was just the next two uses. Now, High Lord's Wrath, which is just a rename of the same talent, but it does change it up a little bit as well. Now, that increases the effect from our new mastery effect by 50% when it's proc from Judgment and Hammer of Wrath. And also, the additional stack from Judgment is an actual stack, and it can continue to stack. So, it's not a huge change functionally. However, it essentially guarantees that you will never have a unbuffed Holy Power ability because of that. You just constantly get those Judgment stacks just to make sure that even in downtime, you never lose out on that. Additionally, that effect from the Mastery ability is highly beneficial. It's a huge source of damage. That Mastery effect, High Lord's Judgment, has also been applied to a lot of our other talents as well. I didn't want to list all of them, but if you just kind of read through, you'll notice that it plays with a lot of talents, such as Adjudication, Divine Arbiter, and Searing Light. We also have had a little bit of a change to Judge, Jury, and Executioner. Whereas before, the talent increased our crit chance from our Judgment cast. Now it's completely different. Not at all related. So now, Holy Power generating abilities have a chance to cause your next, in our case, Final Verdict, to hit an additional 3 targets at 80% effectiveness. So essentially what this is doing is adding a cleave effect to your single target ability. It'll be interesting to see. It's going to come down to tuning to see how effective this ends up being. It would be really nice for this to be a great, cleave ability, or cleave talent rather, but it's going to come down to just how impactful that really is. Now, just as far as notes from my testing, Radiant Glory is very interesting. When I first saw it, I really thought that I was just very intrigued to see how it played out. So pretty much the way it works is it gives you an 8-second version of Avenging Wrath or Crusade. I think the Crusade is a little bit longer. But the problematic thing here for when you are using Avenging Wrath is that the duration of it doesn't line up with your other abilities, so you get some unbuffed effect from your cooldowns. What I've been finding, so if you do want to use Radiant Glory, it's really nice with Crusade because you're taking that 2-minute cooldown all the way down to a 30-second cooldown, whereas you don't get as much of a benefit from Avenging Wrath because it is half the cooldown, but you're also losing out on some of the benefit from it. Part of that is because Divine Wrath, which increases the duration of your Avenging Wrath or Crusade, does not affect Radiant Glory. Now, as I was mentioning before, Judge, Jury, and Executioner, and also Empyrean Legacy, which has been moved to make it a little bit easier to get. They're both going to be very interesting on how they actually play with tuning, but the fact that they're easier to get will make it easier to test them out. And I like Empyrean Legacy causes a Divine Storm proc off of a Final Verdict use. In my experience, it was actually doing quite a bit of damage, and if you want some more single target, like a focus cleave, I think that actually could come into play. It'll just be interesting to see. It'll really come down to like if you're running with the same tank and they usually pull bigger, then these talents may not be as useful. If they generally pull like smaller, but then chain pull, then these could be especially effective, especially in dungeons where there are more priority targets that you want to get down faster. These will still give you the ability to do damage to others, but definitely it's going to take some testing around to see what kind of works for your playstyle. Like I was saying before, Lord's Wrath is very important. Like I said, guarantees the judgment buff on pretty much like any time that you would need it, and then the damage effect from it is huge. The fact that it buffs it by 50% is kind of insane. It makes it pretty mandatory. Now I have this in notes, but could have been in the talent section, but just a note that Greater Judgment is now baseline for Retribution Paladin rather than a talent that we have to spec into. One thing that you may notice is Word of Glory. If you're someone like myself who uses Word of Glory quite a lot, my groups often call me an off healer. Word of Glory is very strong, or has been very strong through Dragonflight. However, that effectiveness is definitely dropping down in the War Within. They have kind of toned back how much they hit us on Word of Glory, where before it was the biggest hit I could get was about 10% health. Now, I would say it's at least starting at 10% health, like a 10 to 20% health of like your max health on a normal cast, all the way up to like 50% health on with a crit. But those were that'll all kind of come into obviously your stats and everything. But that was all based off of a fresh level 80 character that I had leveled through the experience. They also, like I said, have been kind of increasing that effect every so often. So we'll see if it gets any stronger. That said, I think right now it's actually in a pretty decent spot. It's not as effective, but let's be honest, I've healed bosses in 20 keys while still doing DPS with Word of Glory. So it's a bit overly strong right now, possibly. So I'll give him credit on that. I will miss it though. As it stands right now, with the change to mastery and things like crit, no longer being a guaranteed effect, I am a Wrath, all that kind of stuff, it does mix up our stat priority quite a bit. I have found that mastery is our strongest stat, even just right now through prepatch. It is followed pretty much by the three other stats. I've kind of been playing with the different balance, but I think haste is winning out there, and then crit and verse are kind of trying to keep them as high as possible while still keeping a focus on first mastery, and then a little bit to haste as well. As far as gems go, it's no big change from how they work in Dragonflight. Rather than prismatic gems, we have Algari Diamond, and then our standard lesser gem under that. The Algari Diamond, we do have a couple options here. So you either have your raw primary stat with no secondary effect, or you do have the primary stat with a secondary effect. Rather than just an additional secondary stat, the options that at least were available on beta are plus 0.15% critical effect per unique Algari gem color, or plus 2% movement speed per unique Eldari gem color. Typically, I'd say probably got to go with the critical effect gem in that case. I'm unsure if that is just saying for like onyx, amber. That's my understanding. And ruby and I forget sapphire. But if it's you're not really going to use all four of them, so you won't maybe get that much effect from it. But certainly better than just taking the primary stat at the same value. You might as well get that second effect, or you can take that movement speed, a little bit larger impact. For your lesser gems, again, a couple options here. If the way tuning is working and the way that they're reworking healers and dungeons becomes overly punishing, we may want to start going for the amber gems, which are going to give us a decent chunk of stamina. It's 205 stamina plus a secondary effect, in which case, again, ideally, but depending on your stats, we'd probably go with mastery. Or we could go with the onyx gems, such as the quick onyx that gives you 147 mastery and then 49 haste. So 2 secondary stats. If we're finding that we're surviving pretty well, that would be probably my next option there. Real quick, enchants, again, working the same way as like the devotion enchants from Dragonflight. We've got one that has a chance for a good hit of strength with also an occasional radiant damage proc. We have a proc for mastery and then a proc for haste. Those would be kind of my 3 options. I haven't played around with testing those too much, so I'm not sure which way we'd go. If it's the same as right now, we'd probably be going with that Stonebound Artistry, get that mastery hit, but we'll see as we get up there and how they really balance out, and again, where your stats are at. So finally, with the War Within, as you may already know, every spec in the game does get 2 hero talents to choose from. For Retribution Paladin, that is Templar and Herald of the Sun. We're in a great position where they are both a lot of fun and so far been very effective. From what I've been seeing around and then from testing, I definitely see how Templar will be leaning more towards the single target focus, smaller group, like more cleave damage rather than full on AoE, whereas Herald of the Sun really focuses on those bigger pulls. In my testing, I didn't get a huge difference, but also tuning was going up and down, so we'll see how that goes. Some recent buffs to AoE abilities may just further emphasize the Herald of the Sun being the AoE choice, but I would say that they're both, from my experience, close enough that you can really choose whichever one you like more. First, personally, I've been leaning towards Templar. I am prepping for Raid, so I've been kind of going into it with that mindset already anyway. However, I just like the playstyle of it. It's a ton of fun, ton of hammers coming down, and when you line everything up perfectly, it's a lot of fun. Herald of the Sun is also a fun tree. It didn't quite mesh for me. Not that I think it was bad. It's just between the two. I was leaning towards Templar. I was able to find a nice big damage combo with the Templar ability and also just using the effects of certain talents. So using the Sanctification talent, which is one of the choice nodes, that does apply a 10% bonus to our Empyrean Hammer damage after every Judgment cast. That does also stack, and it applies off of Divine Toll. So, knowing that, we're going to start with our normal opener of Wings and Final Reckoning or Execution Sentence, whichever you end up speccing into. We're going to follow that up with Judgment to get 1 stack of Sanctification. We'll follow that up with Wake of Ashes to get the 3 Holy Power and enable the Hammer of Light ability. Now, instead of immediately using Hammer of Light, what I'll do is then dump some holy power into a whatever spender. So, Final Verdict, Divine Wrath, and if you're using Judge, Jury, and Executioner or Empyrean Legacy, kind of uh, that'll impact that, influence that. But regardless, just getting rid of some of our holy power so we don't waste any, and then I'll use Divine Toll, especially in a cleave or AoE pull. This is going to give us immediately a full bar of holy power, and also it's going to add up to 5 stacks of Sanctification again, because those are all individual judgment casts. At that point, I'll use Hammer of Light, and all of those Empyrean hammers that come down are 60% buffed in their damage. It's insane. It's a ton of fun. You see hammers coming down on all the targets around you, and yeah, they're buffed for a ton of damage. This will be especially effective in like the 5 target pulls, that kind of range. Just due to the way that Hammer of Light works, it will strike 4 additional targets. But it should still be quite effective in the way that you're using those abilities that you would be using anyway, just to get that all lined up properly. So I will put up some screenshots of the talent builds that I've been using. I definitely think there's a lot to be gained for each of us based on our playstyles to test out how talents like Empyrean Legacy, Judge, Jury, and Executioner, how they work for us. They are more reliant on playstyle and like group playstyle. So while they may not be as useful for some others may find that it is kind of like if they kind of hit that sweet spot of cleave damage without losing out on full AoE. Another thing to figure out how it works for you is Final Reckoning and Execution Sentence. Just because of that AoE nerf to Final Reckoning, it does make Execution Sentence more valuable even in those AoE situations, to even though it is a single target ability. An important thing to remember with the recent Mythic Plus rework, every week is now tyrannical and every week is now fortified as well. So figuring out whether you need to lean more on that single target or single target focus cleave, or lean more towards AoE will be very kind of impactful on those talents, especially as we get into further seasons and things, dungeons that we haven't tested yet. There's a lot to be excited about for Retribution Paladins, and definitely still a lot to experience. For myself, I've spent some good time on the beta. I can't wait to see how we perform on the live servers once we've got our own gear and we really can dive into min-maxing of stats and everything. But I think we're in a good spot. At the very least, we're a very fun class. We already were. And we lucked out big with our hero talent trees. Again, they're a ton of fun. Great class fantasy. Cool artwork and the logos. And yeah, I'm interested to see what you guys think. Definitely, if you find something else is working better for you, different from what I've mentioned, or if there's a talent that you think maybe is underrated. For example, Divine Hammer is one of the ones that I had listed as a rework. That talent is still useless in my book. I think it's actually even worse, maybe. But hey, maybe someone likes it. But with that, like I said, I have been mostly streaming these days. Just hit affiliate recently. Super excited about that. I appreciate everybody who's followed, and spent some time on stream. I generally stream every Tuesday evening, and then we'll be streaming our Mythic raid, or raiding in general, but Mythic once it opens up, on Friday and Saturday as well. Definitely would love to have you come join. May start throwing in some other streams then as well. The War Within comes out in, well, 10 days from today for early access, 2 weeks from today for the broader launch. If you're watching this in that time, definitely come join. I'll be streaming from the moment I can get onto the servers on the 22nd of August, as well as the 23rd. My goal is to have my Paladin level 80, and then at least one other character by the end of the 23rd, so we can really get into some good progress on the 26th when even more of the game of the expansion goes live. But yeah, hope this was helpful for you. Give some good information, a good idea of what's to come. Hope you're as excited as I am, and we'll see you next time. I don't know, Algari, Algary, Algary, Algary.